Great, we are live. Welcome everybody to the Security Work Group meeting, the 1st of August. Before getting started, we'll share the minutes in the chat. Please add your name there. I think that we can go directly to the agenda unless someone does someone have any announcement? I don't think so. Okay. So great. Going to the first document, the best practices document, the issue 819. Let me go. Let me open it here. Yes, we are here. I think that would be great to define at least a point that we can open up requests for reviews, right? I think that we have good stuff there. We just need to discuss about. There's one question from Andrew that I forgot. I don't know how to spell his name, but it's about including malicious code as code example. So I can understand his point of view because, you know, like there are some security issues that we can't guarantee. We can't be, I don't know, protective or something like that. And most of beginners will fall on it. So that makes sense to not include malicious code. But I think is important to have at least mentions on how the attack works and at least how you can mitigate it. Actually, more importantly, how you can mitigate it. Okay.
So is the question for one item specifically or in general?
I think that it's for the question is for the general side, but it was added in a specific item. For instance, in the issue you see the best practice document, and in this document we can see that we are willing to add an example of shared paths that have interference in a node.js application. That's pretty easy. If you if you run your package in a TMP folder and you require a module, then you can intercept it somehow.
Yeah, so, but that's okay, right? Having an example of that.
Having a code example of that, I'm not sure if that's okay.
But in this case, isn't the vulnerability about the file system more than the code present in it?
Yeah, but I mean, I would say that other platforms like Python, when you require a module, it will not read other paths, like the previous path. If you are in the TMP folder, it will read the root folder, and that's shared. So if you require a module, it will read the root folder, and then you can fall in some vulnerability. So
yeah. My question is, in this specific item, what would be a malicious code example? Because for me,
okay. Sorry. I think that malicious code would be just an example of, like, let me think about it, because it will be just a working example, right? No, I don't think there is a problem.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, so at least from my point of view, if the example is just, okay, here's how the file system might be set up, that could cause an issue if someone has access to this folder.
Oh,
and
I remember.
They put code there. Okay.
I remember. Let me share my screen. I think it's better. Just make sure I will not leak anything. Okay. Yes. Oh, good. Hopefully. So we are here. So let's see that we have an example, code example here, right? So let's see, I have an application here, app. And inside my app, I have my index.js, and I have my module.js. And inside my index.js, I require my module. Okay. It should work. Great. Yes. So, but if app is a shared path, someone can enter in this path and create a module, just module without the extension. So for instance, module. And it will be interpreted as a JavaScript. So one can write JavaScript on it. So if they intercept and make something like hello, and you run your code again, instead of requiring module.js, it will require module. So I think this is a code example that we should avoid at least. This is like different of the documentation of the discussion, the top discussion, but it will be also interrupt with the module resolution algorithm that we have in Node.js. So I think that is pretty important to mention, but without code examples, for instance. What do you think?
So I don't agree.
Okay.
My point of view is that security by obscurity doesn't work. It's like you cannot just, I mean, if it were like, I don't know, a 0-day exploit where like a JavaScript code would allow you to enter a system that you shouldn't be able to, then of course you shouldn't publish that. But for a known, for something that is known to be problematic and that you want to avoid, I don't think, I think avoiding to put an example in fear that someone will use it in a malicious way is not, you don't get that much benefit out of it compared to the benefit you get out of having the example for people to really understand how it works.
Okay. I mean, I concur with you. I'm trying to add his thoughts on this example. What I believe that what we can do is basically include all the code example, regardless malicious or not, and then in the review, if someone raised something, we can discuss on that. I mean, I believe that there are some specific code examples that we show that expose, like for instance, prototype pollution. I know that this is like well spread every blog. If you search prototype pollution, you'll see several code examples. But if we have it in our official documentation, I think that it won't be ethical, at least, because this is not a real vulnerability of Node.js, because Node.js is telling, okay, you are vulnerable to it. You need to mitigate it somehow. We don't care. And yeah, and we are not providing anything to solve it. At least all the mitigations can fall in some levels. And that's the reason that, like, even if we expose, we are just saying, okay, you are vulnerable to it. That's it. That's how that's how the cookie crumbles, and that's it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. So we should have the examples and then we should review them to see if someone comes up with a good reason to not have them. But I agree that there are cases where we should not just publish malicious code. That I agree with that. But I also think that in general, it's better to have examples as much as possible.
Okay. So I think that what we can do right now is basically define endpoint, a checkpoint at least for this document to publish it, to at least open the pull request, right? So what do you think? How we know the endpoint for these pull requests, for this document?
Yeah, I will say maybe how we are going to, maybe something that can help us to define when we are ready is how we are going to publish, like in terms of how people will access to this. It's going to be like a document, kind of a blog post kind of thing, like a single piece of information, or do we want it to have it like, I don't know, like in a more complex way, like a Docusaurus thing, we tried at the beginning, or I don't know, I think depends on how we are going to show it. It will depend on how ready we are, although the pieces of information that we have already can be reviewed even if they are not the final format, but the content will be the same if we split it in a more dynamic web or if it's going to be in a single document. But,
Yeah.
I think that can be a good discussion prior to the deadlines.
I believe it will be available in the Node.js official documentation. We have the API and we have some guides, tutorials, it will probably reside there. So, I mean, early feedbacks is always good. We just need to define what we want in this document and what we don't want. So, as we can see, the structure is basically we have document content, document format is like just establishing the expectations, I'd say, some assumptions. I think that these assumptions will be fulfilled by the threat model, so I would remove it. What do you think? What do you guys think?
Yeah, I was thinking that. I think that that part is already in the threat model.
Okay, everybody agree? So
I think so. We can point to the threat model, and if there is something additional that we have here and it's not in the threat model, because whatever reason, we can just extend with a little paragraph or something, but mostly it's covered already by the threat model.
Okay, just remove it. And then we have the threat list. This is also ambiguous, I would say, because in the threat model, we will have the threat list. And how we can keep them sync, it will be a maintenance problem. I believe that, I don't know, Facundo, do you have experience with those best practices security document? I saw some example of Ruby, Python, and some of them does not list a threat as like a specific mitigation, but it's a different name.
Yeah, so it depends on who's the intended audience for the document, right? So if it's security researchers or people who report vulnerabilities, then having the different vulnerabilities be the headers for the section, that makes sense. So in the case of the threat model, for example, I would indeed put the on each section the name of the, like for example, malicious third-party modules or denial of service, right? Whereas the best practices document, to me, it sounds more like it's intended for developers, right? Not for the security
users.
researchers. So that is a good question. Maybe we should organize it differently in the sense that depending on, so from what I can see here, the best practices are tied to fixing a specific vulnerability, right?
Yeah, actually, I would say that the best practices document should collect all the now vulnerabilities in Node.js, for instance, the shared path, and how they can mitigate them. Like we need to expose it to someone, and in order Node.js is vulnerable to it, so I need to do it to mitigate somehow. And also some clear mitigations. For instance, if you don't want to have access that a module to not have access to a specific module, use the policy mechanism. That's a clear mitigation, you know. So I think that is the mix of both sides, like non-vulnerability that Node.js does not have any feature to protect against, and vulnerability that Node.js contains mitigations.
Yeah, okay. Then my question would be, why would we have then the specific vulnerabilities inside the threat model? Because in the threat model right now we're focusing on defining like this exactly what you say, which parts are protected by Node and which parts the user should take care of, right? Yes. And it's more of a theoretical document. It's like, okay, Node will do these things and it will check these things, but not these. And here are like the concerns that Node takes care of and the ones that it doesn't. And maybe we should keep it at that, like a very high level overview. And then in the best practices document, actually specify like only there, specify the specific threats. Because otherwise, it's like you said, we'll have synchronization issues where if both documents list all of the different vulnerabilities, yeah, it will be redundant.
Yeah, I believe that what we can do is tie, like in the threat model, we have what Node.js does not secure, does not guarantee the security. And those lists should be fulfilled by the best practice document. I mean, Node.js does not guarantee it, but you can do it to mitigate it. You know? Sorry,
yeah, exactly.
I mixed the language. So,
yeah, so I think it makes sense, right? So in the part of the threat model document where we specify the things that Node doesn't trust and the user should take care of, there we can say, okay, and here's a link to the best practices document that lists all of the possible ways that,
absolutely.
or all the, yeah. I think that makes sense to me.
Okay, agree. Let me include it already to the threat model. Otherwise, we will forget. But we still don't. We haven't defined the endpoint, right? We need to specify it.
Oh yeah. So are we talking about both documents now or only the best practices document?
Right now, the best practices.
Okay. I mean, I would be in favor of just creating a pull request and requesting reviews. At this point, we don't need it to be perfect.
Yeah.
We need it to be good before publishing, but having an open PR for it, it's not publishing, it's actually requesting reviews. So
yeah, but the problem is that currently in the best practices document, we have just the threat list and we have a single threat mitigation. We need
okay, yeah, I see. But each thread has a list of mitigations, and yeah, this goes back to the previous discussion, right? It's like, should we have a different section for mitigations, or should we just make a list under each thread for the mitigations pertaining that thread?
Okay, so okay, that makes sense. Just one thing that I think we need to specify here, to define right now is like is threat list the best name? Like we need to specify the CWE for each thread, or we need to rename it to something more readable, at least for developers at least.
I would be in favor of having a simple name for the title, and then in parentheses you can specify a CWE if applicable, so that people who are searching for those specifically can quickly find them. But yeah, I agree that we should prioritize readability here.
Okay, so
do we want to have everything in the same guide, or do we want to build like super different guide for each thread? I have hard time to pronounce it in English. Threads list.
That's a good question. I think that to the docs, everything's the same in the same page is better for review. But when we publish it, I think that if we create one page for each mitigation, I think that would be awesome.
Yeah, sounds good.
So okay,
Maybe also I think one thing that could be cool just to improve if we want just to improve a bit the Google Doc, because I find it quite complicated to read, to be honest, because there's a lot of like the title I think are not okay, they are gray, so not easy to read. So like when I try to read it, I kind of switch off threads, but I don't. Yeah, I feel that it's hard to read, so I don't know if we maybe if we translate it in pull request, it's maybe not a problem. But if we want to keep working on the Google Doc, I think we should make some line split, and I don't know, just to make it more readable, because I find it's hard to go to read and so to give feedback if the thing is hard to read. I told for myself, because the content is already hard to understand, but if it's not complicated, I think it will be easier to understand if it's easier to read also.
yeah, totally. I can see that. I just don't know exactly how can we make it more readable, like splitting lines. We are currently using headers, heading for each section.
I think one of the things we can do, I see that, for example, a lot of text, most of the time I like to make it justify, so it align on both sides. I think it's quite better to read. And yeah, I think, for example, at each new thread, we should I don't know we say in English, but make a new a new page for each new threads, because like sometimes we are just switching off threads in the middle of the page. So and because the title is gray and not easy to see that you are switching off threads, it's like you are moving to another threads, but visually you don't get it that you are on.
Okay, so your suggestion is to remove the thread list top and then make everything a header tree, right? Like way bigger.
Yeah, just make new page each time we switch off threads. We just add a new.
Okay, got it.
Yep.
Do you mind if I quickly try it and we can see how it looks?
Yes.
Good.
I'm definitely not good on those those things.
You have by the way, you have an option on to do it on Google Drive, I think.
We need support to Markdown. I think that's that's the thing. Having full support to Markdown will solve everything.
I have my interface in French, so I guess this is not the same on your side. But I think if you CTRL plus enter and it make the things.
Okay. Yeah, I've solved it.
I cannot figure it out.
Try to do it.
Okay, patching. Okay. And yeah, we can, I don't know. Okay, yeah, like this. So we have.
Okay, it
It's
seems
this
to
one.
work.
So yeah, so now, and we can move threat mitigation. So yeah, so now I think it's more easier to read and get when we are switching from one to another.
Okay, so let me just read the document content. Best practices are simplified, condensed way to see best practices. Okay. Attacks explained. Third-party libraries. Resources. I think resources we can remove. Reference, I think that we can remove. I actually, I'm not sure if we can add reference as a organism. I'm not sure how it works, the license, you know, if we mention someone.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
as well,
that's a good point.
whatever we include in the resources also has a different evolution. So we don't have a control over it on the time, you know. So for example, if a guideline that we refer is fantastic now, but in
Yes.
6 weeks is not that fantastic anymore, then it's hard to change, you know. So yeah, I think maybe not having resources will be good for now. Yeah, also in terms of best practices guide is not super big. So I think, I mean, in terms of how big other Node.js best practices kind of things are, and it's very specific to security. So I think it's fine because other guidelines, they have a lot of reference for more open topics, you know, that are not just strictly security. So, and are super opinionated as well.
On that point, we might rename the document, right, to security best practices. Oh, sorry, it's already done.
It's already it.
Yeah, it has changed over the time. I think. Yeah, I think it was in the H1 different than the title, and then change it. Yeah, now it should be fine.
Yeah.
Anyway, for resources, what we can do eventually is to make a link to, for example, our own Node.js security, where there is a lot of, you know, educational article and things like this maintained by the community. I mean, by the community, by people like Liran, me, and you, I guess. And so yeah, so I think it's okay. If people are searching for resources like good article, video, and things like this, I think this is a good link.
Yeah, I think that definitely we can have two different sites. Like the first one is the official best practices, like the one that we just go straight to the point, and the other one's like community, ecosystem, security, and certainly we can add a bunch of stuffs there. But probably it won't be published in the Node.js documentation, but instead it will be live in like in a .md file inside the Node.js repository, I guess.
Yep.
Okay. So, well, we have we need to write them down, or the next task of this document. Let me go with. Oh, I mixed a lot of things. Sorry. Okay. Yes, I'm going to create a new page below, and then we will have the next steps. That is rename threat list to a friendly title. Is this right? Friendly. Rename threat list to a friendly title to make it easier for users. And include more mitigations. Include mitigations. I think that is just the those two steps, and then we can make the pull request. What do you think?
Yeah.
We still have the question of if we should add mitigations disconnected from the threads. Because it's like, okay, here are a list of mitigations. Mitigations for what?
Oh, actually, the mitigation is more related. I mean, for instance, we have two different threads, and you can use both mitigations. You need to replicate both mitigations, right? If we don't have it in a separate section.
True, but you could also just link to the part of the document where the first. So if two threads have the same mitigation, you define it on the first one. And you say, okay, the mitigation is to do this. And then on the second one, you say, okay, the mitigation is the same as in that other thread, and then you link to it. Because I mean, otherwise, unless, like, if we had, I don't know, 10 mitigations which are shared between all the threads, I would say, yeah, let's definitely have a different section for them, because otherwise it's going to be a mess of cross-linking. But if we only have one mitigation,
hope nobody saw it.
Yeah, I agree with Facundo. Yeah.
So I believe what we can do is okay. Also, your suggestion is great. I just saw the return here. Sorry. I believe the suggestion is great, because if we publish it, every mitigation or every thread in a separate document, I don't want to have a link to mitigations, like that don't make sense. That's true. I can concur. And what we can do is basically, instead of, for instance, the first thread is malicious third-party modules, and one of the mitigations is use policies. We can rename that to like using policies to mitigate malicious third-party modules, and then we have the continuation of this thread and the mitigation, and these can be pointed in a separate document. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Like if there's mitigations that require their own documents because they are complex or they require a bunch of explanation, then we should definitely have separate documents for them. Okay.
So, instead of include mitigations, is remove mitigations, and do it in line. Is it? I think so, right?
Well, at this point, we only have one mitigation that is on a separate section, right? The recursively freeze JavaScript built-ins.
Yes, we have this.
Is that one shared between several threads?
Let me see. I don't think so. No, it's just for monkey patching right now, but it can be used for other.
So, I mean,
okay, it's monkey patches and also prototype pollution attacks.
Okay. And do you think it's feasible to have, let's say, a 1 or 2 line description of the mitigation on each of the threads, and then we can also add a link to a separate document? Or do you think?
Yeah, like a different document, like using a recursive freeze JavaScript to mitigate some specific thread, right?
Yeah. I think that would be nice.
Yeah, I think so. So instead of, rename thread list to a final title, and also split the mitigation, split a specific mitigations in a separate blog post document. I think this is what we want, right?
Yeah, I think so too. So for example, right now I'm looking at the first thread at malicious third-party modules. Yeah. And then in the mitigations, we have a list of 4 different mitigations, and 2 of them are actually links to. One is a link to policies in the node documentation, and the other one is a link to a blog by Ulysses, I think.
Yeah.
Which has the node secure guidelines. So I think it should be like this. It should be like, okay, there's a list of mitigations with a short description, and then we link to the actual documentation.
Yeah, actually, that makes total sense because we don't need to maintain it over the years, because the mitigations, some mitigations might be different, and if we hold it in a single document, it means that we need to look to it every single month or every single release to check if that is still true information. I think that this document is just need to say, okay, you might be vulnerable to it. You can do it to resolve and or follow this workflow. And the workflow is the mitigation, right? So
yeah, I think the value in this document is in the easy to read description of the thread, so that someone can just drop in and see, okay, the thread is about this specific situation, and then the mitigations can be a quick list or more like an index to see, okay, here are the things you should check out to see how to fix this.
Mm-hmm.
And then in a way, we are outsourcing the non-trivial mitigations.
Okay. Yep. I think that we reached a consensus. So let's go to the next issue then. That is the issue 802. Automatic check for dependencies vulnerabilities in Node.js CI. I remember the previous meeting we discussed it to remove all the content and make it more readable, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there are 2. Yeah. Sorry, Rafa.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So I was hoping Michael was going to be in the meeting so that we could discuss this, but currently there are 2 open things to do with regards to this. One is what Rafael said, that whenever there's a new vulnerability and we create an issue for it on the GitHub repo, the text of the issue should only include the vulnerability ID itself and not the whole output of the script. Because right now, the script returns, I don't know, if there are 6 new vulnerabilities, it returns a text with those 6 vulnerabilities. And then the issue right now being opened will contain the full output of the script instead of just the specific vulnerability that issue refers to. So that's one thing, should be a pretty easy quick fix on the, not even on the node repo, it's just on the GitHub action that runs the script. Then the second point is with regards to, and this is what I wanted to discuss, with regards to blacklists for vulnerabilities that the script should ignore. In this case, those vulnerabilities are things that are either not vulnerabilities in Node, or that doesn't apply to Node, don't apply to Node. But the problem here is that right now the blacklist for the things that we ignore is a text file, or it's a file inside the Node repo. So the script, when run, it has that file next to it. It reads it and it says, okay, from these vulnerabilities, I'm going to ignore all of these. The problem with that is that if we want to add vulnerabilities to the blacklist, we need to open a PR on the Node repo.
Yeah.
And if we want to add or change the blacklist for previous Node versions, like long-term support versions, we also need to backport those changes in the blacklist. Yeah. So it becomes a cumbersome process, right? So my idea there was to, yes, Rafael.
What about instead of like having a blacklist, you don't have the blacklist? Like every vulnerability should be considered a vulnerability, and then it will make the script open a bunch of issues. Okay, but before opening those issues, the blacklist might be search for the current open or closed issues that contains the flag does not affect Node.js. If the label exists in this specific vulnerability, it should be considered vulnerability. So it will not open, like it will be a dynamic vulnerability. So let's make it more clear. Let me elaborate. The problem is that when you have LTS versions, you might have vulnerabilities that affect the node 16, but does not affect node 18, right? So then you have backport, and you might have backport blacklist. But if we have specific labels for each version, for instance, the script run and open a new issue called like vulnerability X in the Node.js 18. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So and then open a new one in the 16. And we have included the label 18 and 16, right? But in the 16, we have included, okay, this vulnerability does not affect the 16. So we have included the label and we close it. So every time that the script runs, like the script is running in the 16 version, it will find if you list all the vulnerabilities, filter the vulnerabilities that does not contain an issue open with does not affect Node.js, and then for the others it will open. So then in the beginning it will be hard, like we need to do does not affect Node.js for a bunch of stuffs.
Yeah.
But I think that the script will become more smart how the time goes. Does that make sense?
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So that is part of the solution, because indeed, right now what we do is when there's a new vulnerability found by the script, we create, or a GitHub action creates an issue on GitHub, right? And then from then on, if the next day we run the script again and then the same vulnerability is found, we don't create a new issue. We check that, okay, this vulnerability already has an issue on GitHub, so we don't create the issue again, right? In that sense, the blacklist is now superseded by GitHub issues, because right now, if we run the script, we both ignore the vulnerabilities that are inside the blacklist, and we also ignore the vulnerabilities that have a GitHub issue open. So in that sense, in some way, our GitHub issues list is already acting like a blacklist. So indeed, like what you said, Rafael, part of the blacklist mechanism is already replaced by the GitHub issues. So what I was proposing is to remove the blacklist file from the node repo. So we just don't care about it, at least on that side. And what we can do is we can change the script, because, for example, there are, I don't know, let's say 10 or 15 really old vulnerabilities that don't apply to Node.js. So instead of creating GitHub issues for those, because, I don't know, it's 5-year-old vulnerabilities that we know we don't really need issues for, what I was thinking was to change the script so that it allows you to specify the blacklist as a parameter. So you would run the script on the command line, and you would say, okay, -- blacklist file equals this file. And then you can pass a blacklist file as a parameter. And then that blacklist file, we could have it just not in the node repo, but in the repo where we create the vulnerability issues. Does that make sense? So to make it simple, my main point is remove the blacklist from the node repo and mainly rely on GitHub issues to track which vulnerabilities are or are not affecting Node.
That makes sense to me. I just looking to and just thinking about an edge case that, like, when we add the label does not affect Node.js, we are saying, okay, this vulnerability does not affect Node.js right now. But what about someone one day after use the specific function that contains the vulnerability?
That indeed that is an open issue. So What we do right now is if we create a GitHub issue, and from then on, the script won't create any new issues with that vulnerability. It says, okay, there's an issue, it exists. It doesn't matter if it's open, closed, it has certain tags. If it exists, then the script won't create a new issue. And from then on, the script functionality ends. But indeed, what you said is true. What if in the future that same vulnerability starts affecting Node?
Yeah,
And that is, I don't have a solution to that at the moment.
yeah, I think that's a different project. I would say, like, it's like an extension of this one, that this workflow you did, but it's like it should act as a scan, because as a scan, for instance.
Yeah, the problem is, imagine that you have a vulnerability for a dependency, right, of Node. And I think there was a case of this recently where I think for clib, it will only affect Node if Node used a specific function from clib, right?
Yeah.
But since we don't care about it. Now, what happens if 2 years from now, someone I don't know, 2 years from now or 1 week from now, whatever, someone starts using that function inside Node?
Yeah, but my sorry.
Yeah, no, my point is that if someone commits a change to Node that starts using that function, there's no real automated way of saying, okay, now the vulnerability is
yeah, but that's my proposal. Like, think about a workflow that runs in every pull request and look to all the changes, the file changes, and search for specific keywords. For instance, normally, for instance, clib recently disclosed a vulnerability in the inflate get IP address. Inflate something, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Inflate X, let's say, and we don't use it right now. How can we guarantee that we will not use it right now until this vulnerability is fixed? We can create a workflow that based in specific keywords, look for all the changes, and then search in the git diff if we are using one of those functions. I think that's pretty simple. It can cause several false positives, but that's fine. Like we can like bypass it. Like it can be like
true, but the problem is not only the false positives but the false negatives, right? Because the fact that the vulnerability only affects let's say the inflate function doesn't mean that maybe you can call another function that calls inflate, or maybe you start using another dependency that uses inflate. So, and in those cases, your or the script will say, "Oh, everything's fine," but yeah, actually, we are using inflate.
What we can do is like say that everything is fine in the node.js source code, not in the dependencies. I mean, if node.js starts to call some like a specific v8 function, and this specific v8 function calls the inflate, so indeed this action will say, okay, this is a false negative. Everything is good, but might not be. But we need to be like real, that crucial at least, and saying that this workflow will only guarantee changes in the node.js code base. So if node.js changes the function to call another function that calls inflate, but all those functions exist in the node.js name, in the node.js source code, then this workflow will get it, you know?
Yeah. No, I get it. Okay, so another point, and I promise this is the last one, would be what happens then if, so the problem here is that what happens if, the situation changes. So my point is this change would only affect us. So let's say the vulnerability is released, right? And okay, clib is vulnerable if you use inflate. From that point until the point where a fix for the vulnerability is released, we are, let's say, vulnerable to someone putting the inflate function in the source code,
Yeah,
right?
totally. But I think that we can accept that, like that's not, and also this will run in every, this might run in every Node.js release. So before
Oh,
release,
yeah, no, but
we
my
can.
point is, the opposite. I think my point is it really worth it to add a custom, I don't know, code search function for each vulnerability that will only be useful for until we update the actual dependency that is vulnerable? Because right now, what I'm envisioning the workflow to be is like, okay, there's a new vulnerability, and it only works. Here's the thing: it's also not a good fix for every vulnerability, right? It's like some vulnerabilities don't depend on functions being called, but on specific environments or specific workflows or specific data. And those we cannot really automatically scan the code base for. And for the ones that are actually about, okay, if you use this function, you are vulnerable, I would argue that there's a certain, I would argue how much value we can get out of, I don't know, grabbing the source code on a GitHub action, searching for that function, as opposed to just focusing on updating the dependency.
Yeah, you're right. It will be hard to maintain, and probably a new update will supersede everything, right?
Yeah. My point is exactly that.
Yeah, I believe you have a good point. So okay. So instead, what we can do, I believe, is like, okay, we have a bunch of issues of vulnerability that until now does not affect Node.js, but even not affecting Node.js, I would like to be notified that this fix was released, and you need to update, for instance, the sleep function, the sleep vulnerability. It was open in the Node.js vulnerabilities, and then we have added the flag does not affect Node.js. But recently, Sleep released a new patch that solves this vulnerability, and even not affecting Node.js, I would like to update Node.js. So I would like to get notifications in that issue. Okay, a new release is available. So update the Node.js based on this, and then close this issue. Otherwise, we will have a bunch of open issues, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. I agree with that. We should monitor the, I don't know how automatic we can do this, but what I would say is leaving the issues open until we update the dependencies. I think that's a good practice. And once we actually update the dependency, we can just close the issue and that's it.
Yeah, I think it would be very hard to automate. Probably not worth it. It's better to do it manually.
I think it's better to have a weekly, let's sit down and go through the issues or see if there's any new issue. And
yeah, I think you can add it to create a hoot issue with like the weekly vulnerability report, and then we discuss it in every security working group if we have time.
Yeah, absolutely.
So then we will not forget, like not letting the limbo.
Yeah, completely agree.
Okay. So amazing. I mean, we have discussed just two things, but I think it was well defined. I will probably work a bit in the Node.js security best practices, just to rename a few things, clean up a few things, and then I will, when I finish, I will send it to our security working group in the OpenJS Slack, and then we can do it asynchronously, and maybe open the pull request next week to get feedbacks. Does that
Yeah,
make
sounds good
sense?
to me.
Okay. So thank you everybody for your time. It was amazing. See you in the next 2 weeks, hopefully. Bye bye.